Coming up on the Civil Discourse, eminent short story writer, essayist, and novelist Cynthia Ozick discusses her lifelong immersion in literature, especially as it relates to her Jewish identity and the shadow of the Holocaust, as well as her affinity for the novelists Henry James and George Eliot.
I find that what happens is the work itself is not getting reviewed, but the writer's age is getting reviewed. Oh, isn't this amazing? Could somebody so old continue to be so sentient?
Hello, welcome to the Civil Discourse. I'm Paula Marantz Cohen, Dean of the Pennoni Honors College at Drexel University, speaking to you from my office in West Philadelphia. The goal of the Civil Discourse is to introduce viewers to guests with diverse opinions and life experiences. These are all highly accomplished people who, even when we disagree with them, can help us think more critically and empathetically about the world we live in. Today, I am honored to have Cynthia Ozick as my guest. She's an award-winning novelist, short story writer, and essayist. She is a literary giant. I am personally a great admirer of her work and was thrilled to have her agree to be my guest. Since she doesn't do video interviews, this will be audio only. Cynthia Ozick, welcome to the Civil Discourse.
Oh, thank you for the pleasure of being here.
Cynthia, you have had a long career as a writer, but you also began publishing fiction rather late in your 30s. And I know you've written and spoken about the frustration of not getting published, something that many writers have struggled with. What do you think kept you from being recognized earlier, and what made you persist until you did become published?
At 22, I was working on a novel that was 300 pages long and never finished it. So I was writing all along. Then an opportunity came up to write a short novel in 6 weeks, on which I worked for 7 years. So.
Was that trust?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you feel then you weren't published because you were slow or because you weren't recognized?
Well, I was certainly slow, and I wasn't doing the normal thing, which is you try and get reviews and, you run around and inquire at different magazines and so on. I was so bound to the religion of art.
But you did get married and have a child.
I did get married and I did have a child 14 years later, not because there was any difficulty, but because I had no idea about any of that. I was not related to anything of that nature. It was books, it was literature, it was the religion of art. That's all I cared about.
But that wasn't so unusual at that time, right? You grew up in the Bronx, and I'm thinking my mother was very similar in that she was devoted to French. She became a French teacher, and this was her whole life. I mean, there was a kind of purity of aspiration, I think, among young Jewish women at that time. Would you say that's wrong?
I think the phrase is exactly right. Purity of aspiration.
Yes.
Whether it was widespread beyond your mother and me, I don't know. I have an impression it was not widespread.
You don't think it might have been part of the legacy of Judaism itself, and certainly young women who were beginning to feel their intellectual power within that community?
It was the opposite. I had no faith in myself. At the same time, again, purity of aspiration.
But your writing is so full of, so erudite and so stylistically sophisticated. I mean, there must have been in you some sense that you were exceptional. Was that there? I mean, you can be insecure and still know that you're exceptional at the same time. Do you feel that was operating in you and driving you forward?
I felt exceptional societally. There wasn't that kind of, what shall I say, psychological navel gazing.
You're right. That is much more recent than psychological navel introspection about why we do this and that and the other. I do want to get into though the themes that occupy your work, that preoccupy you in your work, and one is the outsider, the loner, the voracious reader who is generally Jewish, subject perhaps to persecution of some sort. Did you feel like an outsider growing up, and how did your Jewishness affect you psychologically, and the fact of the Holocaust within your lifetime memory as a girl, how did that affect your perspective as a writer?
I grew up in the northeastern Bronx. I was born in the East 80s, in fact, on East 89th Street. Left there when I was 1.5, when my parents bought a drugstore in the Northeast Bronx. The Northeast Bronx was Pelham Bay Park near City Island, and it was full of green meadows, really, and sparsely populated. There were very few Jewish kids in my school, and at times I was the only one in my class. And an interesting thing happened when I was in college relative to this. I was sitting in NYU's Commons. It was directly after the end of the Second World War, the war, as I still call it, and as people of my generation still call it. And the place was full of veterans still wearing their uniforms. And they were, to my mind, old men of 29 and 32. And I was just out of high school. One of these veterans, still in his uniform, came up to me and sat with me and said my name, which astonished me. And it turns out he was from the Pelham Bay neighborhood. It also turns out that he was the Billy, short for William, who had beat up my brother and called him a dirty Jew.
Oh,
He had been one of the American soldiers who had opened one of the camps.
ah,
He had been delivering the Bronx news to different customers, and the drugstore was one of them. And so he knew that I was the kid from the drugstore. I don't know quite how he made the connection, with the 17-year-old sitting there, but he did. And it was a tremendous revelation to me about how experience turned this person upside down and inside out.
wow. That is so interesting. And you think about it now, I guess, in the light of things going on.
Yes, absolutely.
I had read that Eisenhower made it a point that as many troops as possible go and see the camps to see what had been done. Have you had hostile attention to any of your work? You're not overtly political in any way.
I am excoriated as right wing. That's because there are no real liberals anymore. They're all progressives. And they still are called liberals sometimes, but not really anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, we're old school liberals, right? And that is a different breed.
Liberals are now, what used to be liberals are now labeled conservatives.
I mean, I don't want to also have an ideology and feel that I have to have a menu of things that I believe, which seems to become more and more the case lately.
I've run into that a lot, and also directly mocked and excoriated as, quote, Zionist. So that is where it all comes from.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. You are a very expansive thinker, and I hope that that insecurity of your youth has been overcome by your success as a writer. Let me continue with talking about your fiction. I mentioned there is this theme of Jewishness, but being an outsider, which I think explains that it sounds like you were a lonely child living where you did, growing up where you did. The other theme that always strikes me in reading your work is the theme of idolatry in various forms. That tendency to become fixated on things, people, or ideas and lose contact with some larger spiritual or humanistic context. Why this interest in idol worship? And do you feel that as a writer, you're particularly prone to this?
I think mysticism and magic and all of that belongs to fiction, but not to rationality.
Are you a believer? Let's put it that way.
Oh, good heavens, or I should say, oh, good God. This is an impossible question to answer. It isn't a matter of faith, it's a matter of conduct. And that we have it said very, very directly in Deuteronomy in at least two places. The gist of that verse, the heart of that verse is that you, human being, it's not your responsibility to worry about the cosmos and the great, let's call it mysteries. Your job is human conduct. And then it's again in a different part of Deuteronomy said very, very explicitly, it's not in the heavens that you should seek it. It is not over the seas that you should seek it, but it is very close to you and it's in your very being.
That is very much the philosophy of George Eliot, who I know you revere as I do. The idea of conduct, of duty, of moral behavior.
Not faith.
Not faith, right. But yes, I mean, I don't know if you know that famous quote that George Eliot gave about that belief in God was impossible and the afterlife was unthinkable, but the idea of moral duty and moral action was absolutely necessary. And I know you have invoked George Eliot, I guess I'm thinking about the Puttermesser papers in particular, where you have that wonderful imitation of George Eliot's life in the relationship between the character and her suitor. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the influence of George Eliot and Henry James on your work. Henry James, as you have mentioned to me earlier, you wrote your master's thesis on Henry James, and I'm a huge fan of Henry James. And I know that other writers like Philip Roth and John Updike were very attached to Henry James. And I wonder what you think about that and why you think he's had such an influence.
It's so wonderful, and I know you know this anecdote very well, and it's so famous. James visiting New York and visiting the Lower East Side, and he
Yes.
worried about what these people would do to English. And sort of the famous irony is his revival of hot interest in James came about in the 40s. It was all these Jewish boys and girls, some of them
That's right.
immigrants themselves, who came as young enough to absorb the language. I mean, it's you and I.
What do you make of that? What are we so drawn to in Henry James? Is it the elusiveness of his writing?
I mean, it's because he's a model of what story writing should be and is. You know, it is as exactly as long and as short as it should be. The structure is miraculous.
I have to tell you that your last book, which is shorter than usual, your novel Antiquities, which has gotten quite a bit of attention, that novel reminds me in feeling to The Beast in the Jungle, another wonderful, in my view, perfect story by Henry James.
Oh, I never thought of that. You're right.
Oh, it has that resonance, that feeling. First of all, I'm very intrigued by your point that it's been popular antiquities for the wrong reasons. And I have to agree that in talking about it with people, I often feel that I've read it differently from the way they read it. But let me hear your thoughts.
I have been fortunate enough to have attained longevity. So I find that what happens is the work itself is not getting reviewed, but the writer's age is getting reviewed as if the writer, oh, it's very legitimate if you have a 6-year-old prodigy. No, but for an old writer to be praised as a nonagenarian, oh, isn't this amazing? Could somebody so old continue to be so sentient?
I haven't noticed that. I guess there is reference to your age, but you feel that it's colored the way people look at the writing.
I do notice that it seems sort of the main point before they get to the quality of the work.
Well, so much of reviewing now and so much of the culture has to do with labels and branding. Don't you feel so that, being a woman writer or a Jewish writer or an older writer or whatever takes over and determines to some extent how the work is seen, which is a sad state of affairs. I don't know if it's ever been different.
Yeah, well, we certainly know what Charlotte Bronte went through.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the place of a woman to write, Walter Scott said.
I want to talk about the Puttermesser Papers, which is such an interesting novel. In it, just to take one little piece of it, the main character creates a golem. And for our viewers that don't know what this is, can you tell us? And what did you have in mind in having this golem help Ruth Puttermesser become mayor of New York? And then, of course, lose that position.
Since then, I think that book is 1997. But since then, there have been golems aplenty. Mine was the first female golem. The original golem goes back to Prague, and the idea was to protect the Jews of Prague from depredations from the population of Prague. And that's the original legend. In the 70s, when I placed this story, New York was subject to tremendous muggings and crime and dangers. And so it seemed time to resurrect the golem and fix up the city, which he did. But also, being a female golem, I am afraid that she was something of a sexual predator.
Yes.
Which essentially brought the whole thing down. But in the meantime, she organized the gangs, the gangs that were predatory in the subways and so on, to cleaning up the subways and, other improvements. But it didn't last.
I was living in New York at that time. So it was very present to me reading this. It is interesting that it had to go awry. I mean, there seems to me whenever you create some, system that works for a while, it eventually goes bad. And And I wonder also if the idea of creating something like this, imitating God or whatever in the creation, is part of the thought that this is a creature that, made out of her own imagination and run amok.
What you have described is utopia in general. Wherever there's an ideal, and the ideal is so pure and it is so worthy, it is so beautiful that you must insist on it. And the only way you can make it happen is through tyranny. Any utopia will turn into hell.
Yes, and we see that
This is
so
a
often.
political statement.
Yes, and it is this trajectory, and I guess you have to reach a certain age to see it.
No, I think there are plenty of grown-ups still wish to impose.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I know then they can be quite old, and they still wish, or they still have this, I don't know if I'd call it naive, or I would call it
deeply indoctrinated.
Deeply indoctrinated, but also, wouldn't you say, Cynthia, stupid? I mean, really, to be that narrow and to not understand context and change and history and so forth is to be stupid, I think.
I think too.
I know we're almost out of time. I have quite a lot of other things. I wanted to talk about your essay writing. You have a famous essay, the 1997 essay, Who Owns Anne Frank? You take issue with the way she's been, that wonderful diary has been falsely, banally appropriated in various ways. Do you have a thought about some of the arguments that we're seeing now about appropriation and how you feel about that? The idea that an author should not write necessarily about something that they aren't connected to, and, to try and write from a different place ethnically or even gender-wise is looked down upon. Were the germs of that in that essay, Who Owns Anne Frank, or you were saying something totally different?
Well, addressing what we are seeing now in society, this is a way simply of spitting on the whole idea of literature. What is storytelling about if not going somewhere that you don't know?
Yeah.
After all, when you think about Anna Karenina, one of the most stupendous works of literary art ever written, we are so absorbed in these people who not only are oligarchs, but they are French-speaking oligarchs who own serfs. I mean, what do we have in common with them? And yet we are completely devoted to their lives and carried away. And to say that this is an impossible thing, you have to write what matches your complexion, your background. I mean, this is nonsense. It's anti-intellectual, it's anti-literary, it's anti-humanist.
It's anti-imagination, yes. And the problem is that so many people don't read fiction now. They don't read, period, but I think that may be part of it. But I think you expressed that very eloquently. Do you have to write? Is it a compulsion?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like an addiction in a way, but it also, I guess, it keeps you going.
I think it's a compulsion and a prayer. And a prayer is just the opposite of the compulsion. The prayer is voluntary and appealing, and it's a plea. And the addiction is the compulsion.
Yes.
You're right.
And it can be both, which is so interesting. And only people who feel that, have that compulsion, understand that. I want to ask you whether, like James, who went back over his work, and in his New York edition, he revised most of his novels for this edition towards the end of his life. Do you ever feel Like you want to go back, or do you go back and reread your work and see things that you would like to revise?
Oh, no.
No? Do you
No, no,
reread your work
no.
ever?
No, no, I don't do that at all. In fact, I have another compulsion, perhaps, against revision. I get myself stuck this time all the time. I have to finish a sentence and make it as final as I possibly can before I'm allowed to go on to the next sentence, so that I never do drafts. What happens to me is like mopping a floor, kind of mopping yourself into a corner because you've mopped everything around. And if you want to walk over it, you're gonna mess it up. So no, I don't mop floors.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you, Cynthia Ozick, for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much.
And I want to thank our audience for joining us for this episode of The Civil Discourse.